conversation. So I will begin and welcome you this afternoon for our annual Father's Day webinar. Today, we're going to be addressing two important topics that really lay at the heart of the work that we do here at the Center for Work and Family: working dads and mental health. During Men's Mental Health Awareness Month, which it is right now in June, and leading up to Father's Day this week, we felt it would be a great opportunity to engage in a discussion on this really under-discussed topic. So my name is Jennifer Sabatini-Frayone. I'm the director of the BC Workforce Roundtable, which is a network of leading companies that come together to exchange ideas and learn from one another. And I'm going to show you a little glimpse of the fantastic companies that we work with. We're very proud of our partnerships with these organizations that support our work. And you can see a representation here on this slide. So our team at the center tries to span the worlds of academic research and corporate practice. We conduct our own research and develop publications that draw from both academic research and the latest data and trends to inform corporate practitioners working in HR, as well as inclusion and diversity. We also highlight the work of other scholars and thought leaders on topics like career and talent management, inclusion and belonging, new ways of working, and work-life supports and benefits. So today we are very excited to welcome two people to share their thoughts with us today. So Professor Brad Harrington is the executive director of the BC Center for Work and Family since the year 2000. He's also a professor in BC's Carroll School of Management and teaches in the University Capstone program. Before he came to the center, he had a 20-year career as an executive with Hewlett-Packard. Brad is the lead researcher in the New Dad research series, which the center has been working on for over a decade. And he's the lead author of the 9 reports that we have published on fathers, which can all be located on our website. He's a father of 3 himself and has been a leading global voice on the changing roles of dads, both at work and at home. And joining Brad today is Liam Martin, a news professional and father of 2 young children who recently left his dream job at WBZ Boston to focus on his family and his mental health. Since then, Liam has become a spokesperson for working dads and reducing the stigma of mental health for men by bringing much needed attention to this issue. So I will now turn it over to Brad to begin the discussion.
Great. Thank you, Jennifer. And thanks everybody for joining us for this session. We are excited about it. And I hope it will be beneficial and helpful to both the HR professionals that we have with us today, as well as the working dads who've joined us. Hopefully there'll be plenty of time for questions. And I think Jennifer will be monitoring the questions and will, pass on any to us before the end of the hour. I just want to take a minute to review with you just a couple of things about the sort of state of what's going on with dads these days. The first 2 slides I'll show were really from research we've been doing since 2010. And one of the things that we learned that came up repeatedly over the course of the next 4 or 5 studies that we did over that decade was that fathers, kind of based on the analysis we did and based on the questions we asked the fathers, you could break today's dads into 3 groups, relatively equal size, although the largest group tended to be the 3rd group that I'll discuss. The first group, well, one of the ways we identified these guys, there were other ways as well, but one of the main ways in which we identified which group each father fell into was to ask 2 questions. The first question was, how do you think you and your spouse should divide parenting? And the answers could be, well, it could be, she does more, I do more, whatever it might be. And the second question, it was how do you divide it? Not how do you think you should divide it, but how do you divide your responsibilities for parenting in actuality? The fathers, as I said, fell into three groups. The first group of fathers were what we call traditional dads. And they were the folks who said, my spouse should do more than I do on the parenting front, and she does do more than I do. So you would think of that as kind of the 1960s, 70s model where, most often the father's working full-time, taking care of, earning the money and all that kind of thing. And the wife may be working part-time or not, or an at-home mom. So in those situations, you think of them as more what we would traditionally think of as the classic American family, which, by the way, is no longer even close to the majority of families these days. I think there are more single-parent head of households than there are what we would consider the traditional American family. The second groups of dads were the ones who said, I think caregiving should be divided 50-50, and it is divided 50-50. And those be labeled as the egalitarian dads. The dads who said, I want to share this responsibility with my wife, and I feel that I do so. The third group we called the conflicted fathers. Those were the folks who said, I think caregiving should be divided 50-50, and it's not. My spouse does more than I do. So these were folks who were in some state of dissonance, I guess you would say, between what their aspirations were around parenting and what the reality was. As I said, they each fell to about a third of the sample, but conflicted fathers were the largest, with, like, over the course of our studies, somewhere between 35 and 38% of the dads fell into this category. When we looked beneath this data and tried to say, well, what is it, who are the happiest dads? Who are the most fulfilled dads? Who are the ones who feel they have the most career and life satisfaction? We found something interesting, which was egalitarian fathers, by and large, scored highest on life satisfaction and work satisfaction. And also, in spite of the fact they were doing more on the home front, found it the easiest to balance work and family. The second group, traditional dads, tended to score lower than egalitarian dads on most categories, with the exception being that they were happy with the amount of progress they'd made in terms of career advancement. And the second thing is they were happy with their salary, their earnings, okay? It's kind of easy to understand that because they are, in most cases, the primary or sole breadwinner in the family, and they've been, as a result, been able to, or needed to, focus on career advancement as their primary objective. The third group of dads, the conflicted fathers, we looked at lots of different metrics, and they managed to score the lowest in every single metric that we looked at around career, work, and life satisfaction. So if we go to the next slide, thank you, Jennifer. What you'll see is whenever we looked at trying to measure satisfaction across the career life continuum, they consistently scored the poorest in every category. And I'll just quickly go through these. If we said, we asked them, do you agree with these statements? I'm satisfied with the progress I've made toward my career goals. They scored the lowest. To be viewed positively by management, you need to put work ahead of your family. They scored the highest. Employees who take time for personal matters aren't viewed as committed to their work. They scored the highest. I think often about leaving my job. They scored the highest. I find it easy to balance work and family. They scored the lowest. And I'm satisfied with my life overall. They scored the lowest. So when things were, viewed from kind of a negative standpoint, they got the highest scores. When it's from a positive standpoint, they got the lowest scores. But right across the boards, these guys who are in this mode of, I'm trying to be it all and I'm not doing, as well as I think I should be, or as well as I want to be, had the most problematic responses to our statements. One more slide I want to talk about, because we're going to touch on not only issues around career and life balance and the struggles that go there, but we are also going to talk in this session with Liam about men and mental health. And just a few stats. I think for most of you who work in the field, you know that men are much less likely than women to report that they're having depression or anxiety, or to seek help for those kinds of issues. Just a few stats. Nearly 1 in 10 men experience depression or anxiety, but less than half will receive treatment for that. That's over 6 million people suffer from depression. 6 million men, suffer from depression per year, but male depression often goes undiagnosed. It's 4 times more likely that a man rather than a woman will die of suicide every year. And that may speak to this idea of kind of suffering in silence. In a recent survey, 75% of fathers agreed there should be more support for fathers' mental health. And finally, in spite of that, nearly half of the fathers agreed that they would feel judged if they were to talk with others about their mental health challenges or struggles. So with that as a backdrop, we've invited Liam to join us for this conversation, and you'll understand why. Just curious, Jennifer, could we share a link to the piece that Liam wrote in the chat, or would that
I
be
can share a link. I think the paywall is back up on the
back?
article. It had been taken down for a
Okay.
little while, but we may be able to share something with our members as a
Yeah.
follow-up. So.
Okay, as a follow-up, we'll do our best to do that. Or maybe we can bribe Liam to talk to Boston Magazine about getting that paywall dropped or whatever. So let me turn our attention now to Liam Martin, who joins us today. And maybe, I don't know, that's how we'll end up with the screen. So welcome, Liam, formal welcome. Liam, could you give the folks, I mean, Jennifer did a little bit of the resume in terms of, you went to Harvard and then Northwestern, and you did Emmy Award-winning reporter. Could you just say a little bit more to your folks, maybe informally, about yourself, where you grew up, your education, and how you decided that the right career for you was going to be journalism?
Well, it was kind of a long and winding path. A lot of people who end up in journalism know from a young age that they want to do it. They go to school specifically for that. They move out to a small market somewhere in Oklahoma and get that first job and then work their way up. My path was a little unconventional. So I grew up here, as Jennifer pointed out, and went to school at Harvard, studied politics, and thought that I might do something with government, and moved to New York City after college, was doing a couple of different jobs and wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. Nothing was hitting for me. And I had always been fascinated by the news, both political and sports news. I found myself constantly watching cable news and Sports Center. And so I started thinking maybe I should pursue this. I've always been interested in it. I love to delve into these topics. It might make sense for me to make a career. So I ended up applying and did that for a year, did a bunch of internships in news. I was at Bloomberg News when Bear Stearns went under during the 2008 and 9 financial crisis. I did an internship with NESN, the New England Sports Network, and was one of the early people doing live blogging of Celtics games. So I'm pretty excited about the finals kicking off tomorrow night. And then I got my first actual job in TV news in Lansing, Michigan, little Lansing, Michigan, Market 115. I was working as the weekend evening anchor and then a reporter during the weekdays. I loved it. I met my wife out there. It was super exciting. I was making $28,000 a year working my tail off. And I think at one point I qualified for food stamps. And then I always had my sights set on getting back to Boston. This is where I'm from. It's a great news town. I had some opportunities to go to CNN. I had some other network offers, and I was just laser focused on, no, I want to get to Boston. I want to eventually get to the desk in Boston. And then after 3 years in Michigan, I got my shot in Boston as a reporter, did that for 3 years. And after 3 years of really putting my nose to the grindstone, I got a job as an anchor at the CBS station in Boston, which is WBZ News, and did that for 9 years. So it was overall 15 years in television news before, as you mentioned, I quit.
Yeah. I wish some of my students could have heard that, Liam, because they all assume that, they're going to get a degree in communications and then they're going to be the next, I was going to say Connie Chung or something, but boy, that dates me. Gail King or Nora O'Donnell, I guess, would be a better example. But they don't really, oftentimes they don't fully recognize what a difficult and challenging industry it is, and that sometimes you have to be very willing to move from market to market in order to move ahead. So we've already kind of positioned this as this was a dream job for you. And yet after 15 years in the field of journalism and with a master's degree from Northwestern, which is one of the top schools in journalism in the country, suddenly you kind of, or maybe not so suddenly, you came to the realization that this may not be the dream career that you thought it would be. Could you tell us, what caused you to really rethink that, and what was it that made you decide that your dream job may not be the perfect dream job that you thought it would be?
Yeah, it's interesting. When you set your dreams, you have a certain set of priorities, and your priorities when you're 20 are very different from your priorities when you're 40, as is the case with me. So I had this dream, and it, I was laser focused on it, like I said, for years, and there was almost nothing I wouldn't do to achieve it. I worked Thanksgivings and Christmases, and like I said, made almost no money and traveled all over. And when I had my kids, I had my daughter 9 years ago, and then my son 7 years ago. It clicked a little bit for me that my priorities were starting to change. And it was actually when my daughter was a year old was when I got the offer to be a correspondent for CNN. And I asked the recruiter at the end of the conversation, they offered me the job, and I said, okay, how many days of the year am I going to have to be on the road? And he estimated about 250. And I
Wow.
I saw literally, it was like one of those moments. I looked over at her. She was toddling around. She had just started toddling. And I thanked them and said, no, thanks.
Yeah.
So that was the first inkling for me that things were changing. But I still really loved the job, still wanted to achieve, wanted to get to the ultimate spot for me was to get a morning anchor position, because if you work the evenings, which I did initially, you really don't see your kids. You go into the station at 2:30, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, you get home around midnight. So once your kids are in school, you get them in the morning, get 30 minutes of chaos with them, you get kind of like a weekend parent. I knew I didn't want to do that. And so many people had said, yeah, for a parent, you want to be on the morning show. And 5 years into my tenure at WBZ, the morning spot came open. I asked for it and got it, and couldn't believe my fortune until about a year in of waking up at 2 o'clock in the morning and trying to get to bed at 7 o'clock at night. And I was just in a real mental health crisis about a year into doing that.
Yeah.
And that was when I started to think this might not be for me anymore.
Right. The anecdote you used in the front end of your piece, Liam, was about a perfect summer day that you were spending on Cape Cod, of course, God's country as we think of it.
Sure.
It was a day when your wife and your kids were getting ready to go to the beach, and you were sitting there. And I think that was a kind of a moment of realization for you. I know there are a lot of things building up to it that you've just described, but I remember when I was working for HP, my last job there for the last year and a half or so, I was living in Boston and commuting to Palo Alto, which was a heck of a long commute. And on Sunday nights, this was before 9/11. On Sunday nights, my wife and my two little ones, they were like 4 and 2 or something like that, would drop me off at the airport. And in those days, you could go right up to the gate, and there was just a glass that that they could see through. And I remember when I read your anecdote, thinking about when I was at the airport and I'd look on the other side of the glass, and there was Annie and the two little daughters waving to me, and all I could think of is, what in the hell am I doing? And I thought of my father, and I thought he would say, what are you doing, Brad? You don't belong every other week in Palo Alto. You belong at home. And that was that moment for me. And it sounded like that was kind of a moment for you where you decided, this isn't just not going to work.
Yeah, it was kind of two different tracks for me that were pushing me toward this decision. One track was wanting to be as involved and engaged as a dad as I could be, and my own mental health struggle. And they were both leading me to this decision. And that moment on Cape Cod was critical, because what happened was I was in the throes of a mental health crisis. I have obsessive compulsive disorder, and it had gotten really bad as a result of the sleep deprivation. Now, it was kind of a disorder that I had found a way to manage, and the sleep deprivation made it unmanageable. So we're on Cape Cod. It's my favorite place on planet Earth, as you say, God's country. And my two little ones were getting ready for the beach, you know, getting their bathing suits on and running around getting their shovels. And it should have been a really happy time, because here I am. I've got a week off from this schedule. I am with my family. I'm in my favorite place, and yet I felt awful. And it was in a really dark place emotionally. And it was that finally that moment of recognition of this is not normal anymore. And I have to stop putting my head in the sand and, one, get help, and two, really think about, do I want this to be the rest of my life? Is it worth this job that I love and have worked so hard to achieve? It's almost like in poker, when you put all of your chips in and you feel like the guy across the table calls and you're like, I've got most of my chips in already. Do I put in the rest of them because I've worked so hard to get to this point? That's how I felt about it, where I couldn't let this dream go. And that moment on Cape Cod was finally a recognition of, now I don't think this is tenable anymore.
Yeah, got it. You know, as somebody who I've only met Liam, you know, virtually, but I spent every morning with him for a number of years by watching the news show that he did with his colleagues. They had a great team at that point. So when you did step down, I got to say, Liam, my first reaction was I was shocked, because I thought, wow, you were locked in, and you seemed, and you had a nice rapport with your fellow colleagues, and you seemed like you were as happy as could be, and that just, you know, and just that you had, you know, obviously created a front, or been able to kind of gather yourself and say, this is the image I'm going to project as somebody who's really fulfilled, happy, and enjoying their work. But then you know, so I was very curious that when the article came out that explained what your choices were, I was curious to read it, because I thought, gee, this is a guy who seemed like he, quote, had it all. What prompted you when you made this decision to decide to go public and write your piece in Boston Magazine, so that everybody could understand what were the prerequisite issues that caused you to make the choice that you made?
Yeah, it's a good question, because the decision to leave was really difficult and took me more than a year to come to terms with. And then the decision to be public about it maybe was even more difficult. I had a few friends who had gone through some mental health stuff, encouraging me to, you know, within reason, they were saying, I think you should be open about this, because you have, you know, a little bit of a platform anyway. And this moment where people are going to be asking the question why you've left. And for me, going through the mental health struggles that I did, oftentimes what I found most helpful or made the biggest difference was to talk to someone else going through something similar. And when I finally made this decision to leave, I felt that I had a duty to kind of give that back to some other people who might read this piece and go, oh, I don't feel as alone today, because here's this guy who, as you say, seemed to have it all. He had his dream job. He's got a beautiful family. And that it's interesting you point out that you were so surprised as a viewer. I heard that from so many people who said, I can't believe you were, even my own friends who said, I had no idea you were going through a mental health struggle. And the truth is, I got very good at hiding it. And I think a lot of men do.
Yep.
And that's not to say women don't either, but I think women tend to be a bit more open about these things, or they create a little bit of a tribe within their girlfriends, and they talk about this stuff, and guys just don't. I mean, when I told my best friend, hey man, I've actually been really struggling these last few years and I want to talk to you about it, he was completely taken aback, because we were playing tennis every, you know, Saturday and joking with one another. And I just, I found a way to compartmentalize it and not deal with it. And that was probably compounding the problem.
Okay. Yeah, I get it. we're just going to start for a minute to talk about the work-life balance stuff, and then we're going to talk a little bit more about the mental health issues, Liam. In my opening, I just described these three types of dads: the traditional, egalitarian, conflicted, and I'm sure you were paying very close attention to my lecture. When you looked at the description of the conflicted dad, is that something that you thought that was me?
Oh yeah, it's so funny to go through that list, and it just I zoom in on that right away. I think a lot of men can relate to that feeling of, I was raised by a progressive mother. I have my mother's last name, in fact, not my dad's last name,
Wow.
and I I feel an obligation to share the responsibilities at home with my wife, parenting, household chores. And yet there's also just the reality of the demands of that career,
Yep.
where I I couldn't be there in the morning to help. And then at night, I was too exhausted to do as much
Yep.
of it as I should have been doing.
Yep.
So I absolutely felt conflicted. And a big part of the reason for this decision, putting stuff aside, was just that I don't college one day and say, I wish I had been there more, not just physically, but mentally. And I don't want to have that regret. That's, I remember being so affected as a kid listening to Cats in the Cradle.
Yeah.
But, Harry Chapin. That's the one thing I don't want to have a regret as. And so I've worked very hard to get as close to egalitarian dad as I can. It's always a work in progress. I'd be curious to see where my wife ranks me on that versus
Yeah.
where I rank myself on that. I think there's some research. I wonder if you've done it, Brad, that men tend to rate themselves as a higher percentage of the household stuff than their wives rank them as.
Mhm.
And so I'm always conscious of that and trying to get as close to egalitarian as possible.
Yeah, that's great. How was your wife during that period? Was she kind of saying to you, come on, Liam, you need to step up, or or was she more in the mode of saying, I know this is an important job, I know you love it, and you are one, a significant breadwinner in the family, so I need to just keep accommodating the struggles that you're having in terms of the work-life balance issue?
She was more the latter,
Yeah.
but it you that it's one thing that for her to say that, it's another for you to feel her stress
Yeah, absolutely.
and to know that that's partly because you aren't as involved as you want to be. So she was always super supportive, and we met when I had my job out in Lansing, and it was much more grueling and much less money, and she was always supportive. But I could just sense from her own emotional health that she was taking on too much.
Yeah, yeah. We've got a number of people in the chat. So when you mentioned Cats in the Cradles, one person said that song destroys me.
To this day, I can't even think about it.
Absolutely. So yeah, it was from the great Harry Chapin. So I asked you if you wouldn't mind to just read one quick excerpt about the general issue of work, family, and men. Would you mind just talking about, why men's struggles with work, family aren't quite as well acknowledged or recognized as perhaps they should be?
Yes, absolutely. Let me find that. I should have pulled that up. I know you wanted me to do that.
It starts with all of this has led to a major,
Yeah.
or I can read it if that's easier, Liam.
Why don't you read this one? Only because I'm
Yeah.
trying to find your email right now. I should
Okay.
have pulled it up.
No problem, Liam.
You
I'm
can read
very,
that one, and I'll find your email in the meantime.
I know this being on television is new to you, but I'm a big veteran, so I'm prepared for anything. So what you said was all of this has led to, and this is talking about the struggles of work, family for men. You said all this has led to a major and long overdue change in how our society defines fatherhood and what it means to be a good dad. We're expected to be more involved, more hands-on, more sensitive and emotionally connected with our children, more vulnerable with our partners, more engaged with household chores. And that has meant men too are increasingly grappling with the serious question of work-life balance, better put, work-family balance. Do you want to just say a little bit about not just your own situation, but what's your sense of, friendships, your network, society, the research, the work you've done, do you sense that this long overdue, kind of acknowledgement of the changing role of men is something that we're starting to come to grips with as a society?
Oh, I think so. It's first of all, you did a beautiful job reading
Thank
that.
you.
Well done. Yeah, no, I think it is long overdue. I finally have started talking to my friends about these things. I joke with my wife often that I'll take a trip down to Cape Cod with my buddies twice a year to fix up our house down there. We'll do landscaping or painting or something, and we'll come back from the trip, and without fail, my wife will ask how everyone's doing. How's Pete? How's your she'll ask totally reasonable questions about, didn't Jay and Laura have some marital struggles? And men tend not to talk about these things in this way. And so she's always frustrated by my lack of information I have. But I do think that we've started to talk more about it. And this sense that you're conflicted, you want to do well, you want to be perceived as doing well in your career, and you want to provide for your family. We still have this, survey after survey has shown that large swaths of American society still believes that dad should provide. And got that on one hand, and then on the other hand, the expectation that you should be a more involved dad. And so you're getting kind of these conflicting, at least ostensibly conflicting messages.
Yep.
And it can be hard to figure out which is the right path and how do you go about achieving these things. Which is why I think that conflicted dad percentage is so high in terms of the way they don't feel as successful because they don't feel they're achieving in either of them to the extent they want to.
Yeah. And I think women are very, very familiar with that sense of conflict between trying to be a fully engaged mother, this is and a professional. That's something that's been obviously a source of stress and anxiety for women for many years, trying to hold the idea of, I can be an ideal worker and I can be an ideal mother, and these two things are going to add up, and it just isn't always the case. To move over to more the psychological challenges that you talked about, it seemed like you could have stopped with the work family discussion and said, okay, that's it. The classic, he's leaving to spend more time or she's leaving to spend more time with the family is become almost a cliche when people leave job opportunities. So you could have just stopped there and said, that was the problem and left it at that. But instead, in the piece you wrote, you really got into the a pretty detailed description of the psychological struggles you were grappling with. Did you ever find my thing, or would you like me to read that excerpt as well?
I found it.
Okay. So if
Yes.
you could just share a couple of paragraphs from what you wrote there.
And is this does it start?
It's a dilemma. Yeah.
Okay. It's a dilemma that I think many modern fathers will recognize, but unlike women, we aren't talking about it enough, not to our partners, one another, or mental health professionals. Our inclination is to keep our emotional vulnerabilities secret. I, for one, had thought of seeking help more than once over the prior year, and each time decided against it. Asking for help is a sign of weakness, I had told myself. I can solve this on my own. I kept the pain a secret, even from my wife and closest friends. But standing outside that Cape Cod cottage with my head in my hands that day, I knew I was in a dark place, and it had become obvious that my plan to fix it myself wasn't working. I knew I needed help. What I didn't know was how much my life was about to change. In a moment of desperation in the summer of 2022, I finally let my wife in on the secret I had been keeping from her for months. When she asked why I hadn't told her before, I replied, because I didn't want to be weak. Her response changed my life. The strongest thing a person can do is to ask for help.
That's awesome. That's also a great partner and a great wife who responds in that way. I really respected your honesty and your authenticity in writing this piece. You even mentioned something that a lot of men will never mention, which you were crying privately at one point in time when you were trying to grapple with all this. Is there any more that you want to say about why, not only why you came clean, or not, actually, that sounds bad, why you, were honest and authentic in terms of sharing the mental health thing as well, and what you either hope to, share, or what you hope that might accomplish.
Yeah, I think it goes back to what I was saying before, and I don't think I fully finished the thought, is that what I found most helpful when I was in a really bad state was to talk to other people who were going through it. And here I had this opportunity. Boston Magazine came to me about my decision to leave and said, would you be willing to talk about it? And it occurred to me, however many thousands of people might read this, maybe they'll feel a little less alone when they read it. And that was really the case. I mean, to this day, I'm getting daily messages from many people, sometimes women, but a lot of dads who have gone through something similar and haven't opened up about it. And I think they felt some power in numbers, right? That here's a guy's talking openly about it, and we don't tend to do that. And that it felt almost like an obligation to me.
Awesome. And you have heard from a lot of people as a result of that.
Oh yeah, including you.
You just didn't realize all you were going to be sucked into once I read the article. So do you have any thoughts? One of the things that I do a lot of is go to organizations and talk about my research on fathers. And one of the things I hear at the end of a lot of those talks is fathers will say, that was great. That was actually the first time we've ever had a conversation about fathers and the struggles of fathers in this organization. And one of the things I've tried to do is encourage the conversation to continue, because so many fathers, not only individually, but organizationally, just don't share these kinds of struggles. And so I think sometimes organizational leaders and HR people say, oh, persons of color have issues, women have issues, LGBTQ employees have issues, but men don't have any issues, or dads don't have issues. And of course they do, but there really hasn't been an outlet necessarily for them to achieve, a better dialogue around these issues. Do you have any thoughts about things that you could do, or the center could do, in order to, change the equation and get more people involved in a conversation that says, dads are people too, and dads struggle too?
I think doing exactly this. And, I've tried to use my social platforms to talk about this as well. And it's interesting because there are some people who will come at me and say, well, moms go through this. Why aren't you talking about moms? And what my response to that would be, absolutely, moms go through this. They've been going through this forever, and we need to figure that out. And it doesn't mean that dads don't also struggle with this, and maybe the struggle is a little bit different, and we don't tend to talk about it. So I think we need to. It's an interesting thing where, guys now are contending with this thing that women have for a long time, which is that a woman who's a mom maybe feels a little guilty about going to her boss and asking for some extra time off because her kid has this or that, but she has had to make that decision for so long. Whereas men didn't, right? They didn't have to make the decision. It was just assumed that, no, my wife will take care of that appointment with my child, or the kid calls home sick from school, she's going to go take care of that. Now the expectation on men is no, and as well it should be. That's not just mom's responsibility now. That is yours too. And yet we haven't built in for us yet that sense that it's okay to go to the boss. I mean, if I went to my old boss and said, I need some time off because my son's got an appointment, or I want to make his school concert, whatever, they would have looked at me sideways like, no, this is news. You're going to be there. You're going to be at the latest tragedy. And I think it's healthy in a way that men are having to contend with this now. It's just that we haven't quite built in that permission for men to talk about it in that way.
Yeah. And I've always felt that, and again, rightly so, that the women's movement, as they were trying to gain, back 20, 30, 40 years, was they were trying to gain legitimacy in the workplace and be respected as both a mom and a professional, or a woman and a professional, that there was a movement that occurred for women where many, many, outstanding voices really, talked about this issue and really led the conversation, not only within organizations, but even nationally around, what is it that's going on with women and how do we try to help them to rectify this inherent struggle that they find themselves in. For whatever reason, I don't think men have that voice. And I really think it's necessary for, for some high visibility men, CEOs, organizational leaders, academics, whatever, to really sort of get out there and make sure that people say, men have these issues too. And while we've always, not always, but women have struggled to get to the point where that inherent conflict is something that's now visible and understood, that men are struggling with the same kinds of issues as well. And as you pointed out, I think in your article, I mean, women now get the majority of undergraduate and graduate degrees in the United States. So they're coming in large numbers, very, very well, and perhaps better prepared than young men are to take on significant responsibilities. And so, the idea that work family is some accommodation that you make for women is just ludicrous at this stage of the game, because it's something that so many people, moms, dads, single parents have to struggle with. So we need as a national spokesman, Liam, and I'm so glad you volunteered to play that role because I think you'll be excellent. But all kidding
I don't know if
aside,
anyone wants
what's that?
me doing that. I'm not sure anyone would want me doing that.
Oh,
I can be a regional spokesman.
yeah, but if you can be a spokesman and somebody who gets this conversation going, that's tremendous. So with that, Liam, I'm going to see if Jennifer has any questions from the chat that she'd like to ask us, and then I'll come back just for a wrap up with you before the hour ends. Okay.
Thanks, Brad. Yes, we do have a number of questions. Some of them are kind of like on the broader topic, but maybe first a little clarification from Liam. So kind of you quit the job, what was the next step? Do you do different work now? Does your wife work? And how do you pay the bills?
Yeah, I'll take those each in turn. The financial part of this was really difficult because I kind of found myself trapped in that the television news job I got paid really well, and it allowed my wife to have a job that was much more flexible and allowed her to work from home and didn't pay as well. And so once I made the decision that I was going to leave this job, I had to find a way to still make the finances work. We built a life around the salary I had and, a mortgage and all that stuff. So it took me a while. I mean, I made the decision more than a year before I actually quit to do it. So what I did was I started very slowly building a company with a couple of business partners to do PR and marketing, kind of using the skills that we built as journalists, as storytellers, to provide that for businesses for their communications needs. So we do video storytelling, traditional public relations, social media marketing, email marketing. And I just kind of sat back, worked on the company on the side, kind of like moonlighted. And when it was big enough where I could make the leap and not take too big of a financial risk, that's what I did. So it was like a year of waiting for it. We gain a couple of clients, but then you lose one. And I go, I don't think I can make the jump yet. And fortunately, my wife has been super supportive all along, and her job really is flexible, and she prefers it that way. And now I've got a job that can be pretty flexible too. I mean, starting a company is obviously a lot of work, and the number of hours that I do in a day is probably more than I was doing with my old job. But I can put things down when the kids get off the bus, and I can coach their teams and have dinner with them and then pick it back up after they go back to sleep.
Okay, great. Thank you. So we have a couple questions on kind of the bigger issues of, how do you become an egalitarian partner? How can workplaces support kind of these egalitarian type relationships? And, how can women support men in being egalitarian parents as well? There's one question that says, I often hear women disparaging men's ability to do things right. So how do we get past that kind of, I think they sometimes call it a gatekeeper role, and really foster these egalitarian type relationships?
I love that comment. I think Brad and I, when we first started talking, we brought up the archetype of the idiot dad in commercials. So tell me if you haven't seen a commercial with the dad doing laundry and he's like, and he's an idiot. They make dads look like apes in these commercials. And I think that it's starting to change. I think there's some research that they're showing more involved and engaged dads in commercials now, but you still come across it all the time. And I think it's always it's really rubbed me the wrong way. And I know it's supposed to be funny and we shouldn't take it too seriously, but the message you're sending to dads when you show those commercials is that, one, they shouldn't be as involved. And two, if they are, they're not going to do a good job of it. And so it feels honestly like it feels sexist toward both genders. It's sort of saying to women, you know, sorry guys, we just can't do it. We don't know how to do laundry. We don't know how to do household chores. So sorry, it falls to you. And then it says to the dads who do want to be engaged and do want to be involved that you're an idiot and not good at this. And I think the research shows over and over that dads who are more engaged at home and do help with the household chores are much more fulfilled, both emotionally and in their partnerships with their spouse. So I like that comment about the gatekeeper idea and not letting men get away with this idea that just like, I don't know, she's at it, so she has to do it.
You know, and the thing from an organizational perspective, Jennifer, you know, I would just say organizations could do a couple of things. One is, you know, obviously offer men the same kind of flexibility that they offer their female employees, so that when men say, oh, I'm going to flex my hours or take time off, that's not in any way frowned upon. The most conspicuous thing an organization can do to legitimize fathers, I think, is to offer parental leave. And if they offer parental leave, there is nothing that is a stronger signal than that to say we understand that men are parents too. And it's not, you know, that the decision about parental leave doesn't strictly come down to, obviously from the standpoint of the biology, it comes down to men and women, but the bonding and the learning how to be competent caregivers is not something that's unique to one gender versus the other. And the final thing is, I really, you know, as Liam referred to a moment ago, conversations are so important. And as I said, you know, there's oftentimes women's groups, there's groups for persons of color, there's groups for LGBT employees, but rarely are there groups for fathers and dads. And I think anytime an organization could set up some kind of an infrastructure that allow fathers to have these kinds of conversations in a more open way, and to realize, you know, as Liam's article helped to do, there are a lot of people in this boat. It's not just me. And I can get, you know, not only can I get some kind of affinity and support, but I can also get ideas for how I can begin to address the challenges I'm facing. Anything organizations can do to foster that conversation, I think, is great.
Yeah, and we have a couple comments here about parental leave for dads and saying that it should be actively taken by male leaders to show that it's okay for other men to take their leave as well.
Yeah. And, you know, just from our research,
like
you know, that the organizations we studied, you know, EY was one of those organizations. I know they're on the line, but we studied 4 organizations. And what was really striking is when people said, how much support do you get, you know, from senior management? I think women said 85 to 88% said we get gave it the strongest possible endorsement about saying that's the level of support we receive. And over 70% of the dads said the same thing. So when you get to the point where moms and dads are saying that, both of them are saying we're getting a very, very high level of support from organizational leaders, that's huge in terms of opening up this conversation.
Yeah, and then we have another comment here, you know, what do you say when other men say discouraging remarks about not being solely committed to their career when they want to be an engaged dad. I don't know if that's something that you ever encountered, Liam, or you anticipated like that your manager would say that you couldn't, take the time that you needed. But how do we kind of interrupt those conversations that really discourage men?
And it's not just managers, it's also coworkers, right?
Yeah.
Because they're
Mhm.
also influential as well. Liam, did you have any of those?
Yeah. Oh, I definitely had conversations with coworkers that, when I was first at CBS, we had my son, and I think I got 2 weeks at the time, which for that just 7 years ago felt like kind of a lot.
Right.
And there were a couple of guys in the office who joked about me taking it. And I I got really defensive about it because my perspective was not only am I going to take this, I should have way more than this. And I think they were from a little bit of an older generation that sort of felt like, well, you go to the hospital, you make sure the baby's okay, get them home, you're back to work the next day or whatever it is. And I said, that's just not the dad I'm going to be. So I think those perspectives are still out there, but I think fortunately they're diminishing. And now CBS has gone to 6 weeks for the dads, which in my opinion still is not enough. But it's progress.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of the organizations that we work with start at like 8 to 12 weeks and then go up to 16, and a few of them are 20 weeks. Not only in some cases for new parent leave, but also for any kind of caretaker leave if you have an ill spouse or an ill parent or whatever. So they call it family leave, I think. But yeah, we've finally gotten out of the stage where we thought a week was sufficient for men to really bond with their kids, which is great.
Brad, building on the topic of that progress, we have our friend Matt Schneider on the line here, who's been involved with dads for as many years as we've known him. And he says he's been following the CWF fatherhood research since the beginning and appreciates the data, and was wondering where you think we have made progress over these last 10 to 15 years since you've been involved in doing this research.
Well, as I said, the most concrete way in which we made progress is through seeing all these big corporations offer parental leave and offering it, with the exception of the birth and recovery period, a lot of them are offering, or most are offering, gender neutral, equal amounts of leave for both parents. And as I said a minute ago, that can go up to 16, 20 weeks or so. And I think that's the most conspicuous way in which organizations have done this. I think there are more conversations and there's a greater appreciation, I think, societally. I agree with what Liam said a few minutes ago about fathers being conveyed, in a very sort of negative, stereotypical light too often in the media. But we are seeing more and more examples of fathers talking about their parenting roles. Some commercials now that sort of acknowledge the role that fathers are playing, and that's a very good thing. I think where we still need to make progress is to stop, doing, what we talked about just a moment ago, and saying that dads who take parental leave or dads who take, to work a flexible work arrangement in order to accommodate their family needs are somehow not serious about their career. I think that stereotype really needs to go the way of, the dinosaur or whatever. And I think when we can get to the point where moms and dads are equally respected for their roles in parenting, I think then we know we'll have made progress. But, Matt has been the head of the New York at-home dads organization for, I can't talk to Matt right now, but I'm sure it's at least 10 to 15 years or more. And the work that he's done to support at-home dads has been just amazing in terms of making at-home dads feel comfortable when they make that decision as well. So Matt, keep up the good work.
That's great. And I think, the pandemic and so many people working from home also has given men, more of that desire to be present, whether it's, walking the kids to school or being there. And so I don't know if that was potentially a catalyst for more men to step back and say, hey, like, I really want to be more engaged and involved, and I can do that because I now have more flexibility.
Did you observe that, Liam, at all, or?
Oh yeah, in my case, absolutely. So I still mostly had to go into the studio during the pandemic, but there were periods of time where I didn't, where we actually broadcasted from home. I would set up it
Wow.
was a cell phone, and
Yep.
then there was an app that would allow us to do the show live. That happened for a time, and it was, I think, a wake up call for everyone in America about work-life balance and the ability to potentially work from home some days and seeing the benefits of that. So for me, yeah, my case was separate from that, but it was a little kind of a light bulb moment of like, this is kind of nice, to be doing this from home and have the comforts of home, and then to have that more time with my kids, the less commute time, all that. That was, I think, a realization for a lot of people.
Sure. Liam, we're pretty much out of time, I think. Do you have any closing thought, or do you feel like you've said what you wanted to say, or is there anything else you'd like to add before we wrap up?
Well, thank you for including me. Thank you for everyone for listening. And I would just say, dads, moms, everyone out there, if you think you might need some help, it is okay to ask for help. I did it, and it was way less scary than I thought, and it changed my life.
That's awesome. Liam, you were a great professional with the news role that you played for so many years. And we, in Boston, we do miss you in that position. And I know you're going to do great things in PR. And I guess next Tuesday morning, you and I now have a podcast to do. So eventually we may have to take this show on the road, but we really appreciate both, the professionalism and the good work you do, but also the fact that you shared such a great intimate portrayal of what it was like to go through the kind of struggles you did. You did that so openly and authentically, and I, for one, just want to thank you for getting that message out there and making so many other people feel like I'm not alone. So very much appreciate it, Liam.
Thank you again, Brad. I really appreciate it.
Okay, great.
All right. Well, thank you all for attending today. I did put a link to the new dad research right in the discussion if you would like to check out the work that Brad has done over the years with our team and the reports that we've published. But please join me in thanking both Brad and Liam for a great conversation today. And I hope you all have a great rest of your day, and a happy Father's Day a little bit early to all the dads out there.
Still time to shop for gifts.
Thanks,
All right,
everybody.
thanks, everybody.
All right. Thank you.